am the only unbought and unbossed politician. Why should I step back?
This is UNBOUGHT Power Hour with UNBOUGHT. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I am tired still for some reason.
I see that.
Yeah.
I can sense that.
But I'm gonna make it though. I got the coffee.
Oh yeah, here's
Ice version.
Look how cute my cup is. It's from Colombia. Actually, and it's Colombian coffee. I usually drink the Cuban coffee, but I ran out here. Here I am though. Thanks for joining us this Sunday. It's about time.
Not a problem. I mean, it's been a wacky week, so
Wacky? What?
So I don't know.
What happened this week?
A couple things.
Well, good morning.
But I don't know if we're kicking off a return to normalcy this week. Hopefully, like maybe like Sunday's the beginning of the new week kind of deal. So maybe it won't be as strange next week.
Define normalcy though. Like,
there's that. There's definitely that.
all right, Dwight. So I'm really excited to have you on UNBOUGHT Power Hour. Welcome. I've been trying to get you on here since last year. I can say that now. Since last year, I've been trying to get you up here, but you've been super busy, politicking, getting out the vote, being unapologetic, being unbought. I'm really, really excited just because a few things. You're not just a powerhouse in the state of Florida, but across the country. Former senator, but you are a dear friend of mine who actually was someone that I was checking in before launching UNBOUGHT Power, and I value your feedback. And you are someone for those who don't know, Dwight Bullard is a former senator who, when ran for re-election, was unapologetic on Palestinian human rights and was attacked by the right wing and the Zionist community for being consistent with the fight for human rights. So everything you've done since has always been something that I hold and carry in this work. And I'm just really excited to have you. I think it would be dope if you can just talk a little bit to that before we talk about everything else happening.
Everything else?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's so let's start by saying like Palestinian people are dope. Let's start, yourself included.
Oh, thank you.
I saw Ahmed checked in.
Hi, Ahmed.
Shout out to Booze. And I guess start there. So there were a number of issues that would come up during the legislative session around taking these kind of just, I don't know, some people call them honorary, I call them arbitrary positions around, the protection of other countries. And understand this, I'm a state senator. I know some people, confuse state senators with U.S. senators. So U.S. senators deal with foreign policy. That's a different conversation. State senators deal with state policy. So the idea that folks were trying to use state policy to influence foreign policy, even though that wasn't a thing, always bothered me, especially when it was in direct contradiction to another set of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for those unfamiliar with boycott, divestment, and sanctions of the BDS movement, at its bare bones, boycott, divestment, and sanctions are all identified as things we can do under the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. It's considered free speech. People try to categorize that as some sort of violent movement, but literally by its definition, it is a non-violent action being taken place by indigenous people in a region. And so, long story short, the state legislature tried to do a number of actions condemning the BDS movement, or going after businesses that participated in the boycott of the state of Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it just seemed silly, and I'm just going to be honest. It was silly. It was unnecessary.
What kind of attacks did you get when you ran? Like the second time?
I mean, in terms of the election stuff, that's when it got just dumb. But it was, it was the unnecessary pressure for me in the lead up to that,
right.
Where you had like people calling you, oh, you need to take this position, oh, where they give you these kind of thinly veiled threats, like, we don't want you to be perceived as anti-Semitic. And I'm just like, wait,
they're trying to help you out. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, listen, if you do this, no one will question. And you're just like, well, give me the what I've done up to this point that's been that. Nonetheless, it carried over into 2016 and 2016 election. And it just got nuts. Just to, full circle, had a chance to visit Palestine in that same year. Amazing people under such an oppressive kind of space, but still so cool, so very familiar, and I felt like a kinship because it really did remind me of Black people. Just in terms of their willingness to share, their willingness to give, their willingness to talk about their history, and the nature of the trip was so like culturally diverse. Like everyone, of course, when I came back, everyone was just like, you over there just with haters and da-da-da. It's like, we were viewing art and sipping coffee and like, just, it was so kind of pure.
Right.
But in coming back, because I had the audacity to visit Palestine.
The audacity to meet with an oppressed group of people.
Exactly.
Okay.
They decided that I must have been clearly, as a constitutional officer of the state of Florida, I was over there trying to collaborate with terrorists, and so that was the line of attack that I got. I always tell a story. I was sitting on my couch minding my business, and I'm watching MSNBC, and I'm like half asleep, and I hear this commercial like, "Do you know the real Dwight Bullard?" And I was like,
"Stop."
What? Yeah, I was like, "Do I know the real Dwight Bullard?" I was like,
You're like, he sounds familiar.
Yeah, I was like, I'm curious. I do know the real Dwight Bullard, but this commercial is about to tell me something different. And so it was. I woke up, I popped up, and it was literally the planes flying into the Twin Towers. Pictures of me in a hoodie and darkened and the whole 9 yards, and they were unapologetic about the mischaracterization and the lies that they wanted to tell. But it was what it was. I mean, people say negative messaging doesn't work, but unfortunately, too often times it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they say in media, like, even if they release inaccurate information, and by the time they try to fix it, people already believe the first iteration. And this is obviously slander and trying to push misinformation. So thank you for sharing your story. You actually said an interesting word. Speaking of Ahmed and I are on Clubhouse. Dwight is still an Android user, so that's
Team Android, baby.
So Ahmed and I are on this Clubhouse app that's like, it feels like AOL vibes, but it's like all audio. And obviously, as like Palestinians, as organizers, we're like, all right, let's make use of this let's build. We created a club called Palestine My Mind. So yesterday we had about like we hosted like our third conversation. And, you know, we said white nationalists storm the Capitol. What does that mean for Palestinians? What does it mean for us? But a lot of the conversation started to talk about using the term terrorism, and the harm it has had on Black and Brown communities, and that people were kind of debating on whether or not you can reframe that, reform that. And then, so from a comms debate, but also just a legal debate on like, would they actually be charged with terrorism? And I think knee-jerk reaction, we want to call them, we want to call these white supremacists, and how they were just this whole insurrection of how they stormed the Capitol. We want to use that term, but just kind of curious on what you think of that term, just because it's been used to criminalize Black and Brown communities since really like the civil rights movement. We had so many civil rights leaders, Black leaders that were really, like, when we're talking about the feds, we're talking about just all these law enforcement agencies that use these programming to criminalize, which terrorism is like this whole blanket statement, right? Like, there's so many different definitions of what that is. So like for our, just like these Black and Brown communities, we talk about pushing back against that term, using words like white supremacist, insurrection, or what do you feel? Just because I've seen, just like even in the state of Florida, I was telling them yesterday that, you know, obviously DHS, Department of Homeland Security, came after September 11th, the CVE programming, all of that, right? So those are used severely in the Muslim community. And just like I think about the shooting in South Florida, the high school, and how the shooter was actually reported several times, and they supposedly have funding to take care of domestic terrorism, but yet it continues to be failed when charging white supremacists with that. So kind of just curious on where you fall in that line of terminology, and like just how, one, we speak about this issue, but also what does accountability look like? Because white supremacist is a whole.
Right. So let's just go statistically first, right? Since 9/11, the most common practitioner of, you know, whether it be rampant gun violence, whether it be what would be called domestic terrorism, are white people, right? But they have not gotten the same level of consequence as Black and Brown people. And to your point, like what's so fascinating about the American system is that you have entire programs put in place to suppress Black and Brown people by the government, that are then created for that reason. So DHS, you know, we talk about this notion of Homeland Security, but it's literally a new department that is created, you know, out of the cries of the USA Patriot Act to basically spy on people. And
heavy surveillance, right?
Yeah, and keep tabs on predominantly Black and Brown people in these moments. And so on the rare occasion where, you know, someone who is Black or Brown is investigated or found to be that, there's like this, you know, raising of the notion, or, you know, good thing we have this system in place and blah, blah, blah. But then when you have, again, situations like Stoneman Douglas or Sandy Hook, or, you know, we get the lone wolf speech, we get the, you know, we need to focus on mental health, we get the, you know, this was a troubled youth, you know, kind of narrative that gets played out, which is, let's just be frank, it's BS.
Right.
It's an unfair, you know, it does a disservice to this idea, you know, to the notion of Americanism, you know, this American dream that everyone's, you know, created equal under the law when you literally have that level of hypocrisy playing out in terms of actual state and federal policy. So yeah, as we think about what happened this past week, it was insurrection. It was insurrection under the framing of the Constitution, under the clearly defined definition that was established by folks like John Quincy Adams, and George Washington. And the reason I say that that's the case is because part of the reason why they put that definition, in statute was because that's exactly what they did to wrestle the country away from England, right? Like, they did everything that would have been considered insurrection, would have been considered insubordination, would have been considered terrorism. And then when they framed the country, they're like, well, we don't want that to happen again.
Right.
So let's define that so that no one can, show up and kind of do what we did in the future. And for the most part, that has been kind of a consistent policy. Like a lot of people, what was lost on a lot of folks was, we talk about the Capitol being breached. And everyone's like, Capitol being breached, what does this mean? Like, understand that no force, mob, violent group of folks, etc. And I say violent group of folks because, let's be clear, 5 people died. Yeah. One of them was a Capitol police officer who was beaten with a fire extinguisher.
Wow, I did not know that.
By these folks, right? And so, that hasn't happened in this country in 207 years. And I want you to think about all the things that have taken place. And I'll give you another example of, kind of where the government showed up. There was a situation in which World War I veterans around the Great Depression had an expectation for a payment that was due to them that was going to be sort of like Social Security payment, right? And so they marched on Washington. These are all former veterans, marched on Washington to try and get their money. Before they could get to the Capitol, and these are mostly white veterans, before they could get to the Capitol, the U.S. Army was used to suppress veterans of the U.S. Army to get the money that they were deserving of. So it's not like this is unfamiliar to people to suppress people who could potentially, disrupt the flow of government. Take a step further, when the March on Washington happens in 1963, it's happening in the National Mall. It's not happening near the Capitol. This is on the Lincoln Memorial. But it is well documented that the FBI had infiltrators within the crowd. You had DC National Guard on standby because at that time it was the largest group of folks in that space at one time, and there was the real concern that these black folks who were it was a mixture of black and white folks, but these people who were fighting for justice might actually do something to do something more, right? So I cite these examples that the government has no problem in its history, putting down insurrection or the potential of insurrection. This is a unique circumstance because you have a president who was inciting it along with all his people, and you have members in the government that were complicit in creating these circumstances.
So I guess I wanted to ask you, like, even before we jumped in, is just like, what was going through your mind when this was happening, right? Like, I think a lot of us, like, as Black and brown communities are just kind of like, this is white people problem. But like, also like as chaotic as it, like, just like learning about the news, like trying to process it, it's like, yeah, of course this is happening. Has been, y'all have allowed this to happen. And so a part of it is not just Donald Trump. It's not just the GOP. Like, Dwight, like a lot of it is establishment Democrats or folks that have been complicit in just like what accountability looks like and what it means to, well, defend Black lives, what it means to be um
Right.
so for that's one part of it. And then another part of my like a visceral reaction that I had is just like, how does this translate into just pockets of our different communities when folks are feeling emboldened and inspired by these people that were literally given the green light to do this, and given the green light literally, but also leading up to it, and what does that look like? And just kind of like, what were your thoughts and on that?
Well, I mean, it was my initial thought was this is textbook white supremacy at the
Yep.
end of the day. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think so most folks at this point of the internet generation, etc., did not grow up in an
Mm-hmm.
overtly racist kind of society, right? So, I say that to say that, no one's had to drink from a black or white water fountain in a while. No
Mm-hmm.
one's had to go to a black or white restroom or any of these things that were very kind of like concrete forms of extreme racism.
Mm-hmm.
It is the nuance of white supremacy that is kind of, been tough to explain to folks, like, the war on drugs and what that looks like. A broken, or I shouldn't say a broken, but a
A racist.
criminal justice system that has been doing what it's been doing for a long time, but disproportionately affecting Black and brown people, even though they represent smaller portions of the population. And it intertwines through a number of different things, healthcare system, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
So to see that happen in real time, I hope, for me, it was just like, I hope people appreciate like what white supremacy looks like, or like what
Mm-hmm.
white privilege looks like, what white supremacy looks like, because the idea that they could go in there
Mm-hmm.
and then basically, let's be clear, I know they used a little tear gas, but for the most part, these folks were just escorted out.
That
Like,
that was one of the first things. People were like, "Oh, where's the tear gas?" All of a sudden, like,
yeah,
because when Black and brown protesters are in the street, they're met with a sea of bullets, and if they're not being shot at or have tear gas, they're being detained aggressively and viciously. And so, yeah. And then there's that whole
yeah,
thing, there's that whole discussion too about why are folks calling on it wasn't necessarily that we were calling on law enforcement, because as an abolitionist, we don't want law enforcement, but we're just saying, like, where are you now? Like, you're saying that you need to use this kind of force and brutality against specifically Black protesters. Where is it now?
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. No mass arrests, no,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like I saw a couple of friends check in who are some of the
Hello,
organizers
friend.
of some of these summer's events. Vanya specifically, I saw her check in, who organized one of the Black Lives Matter marches in South Florida. And it's stuff like that where, like, in order to do a peaceful protest as a Black person,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like you have to be complicit with law enforcement, right? Meaning, like, you can't just freely organize an event. You have to have the permission of law enforcement in order to exercise your First Amendment right, because they'll say, well, we want to do it to protect you or do whatever. Listen, it's all part of you trying to control the parameters in which somebody's speaking out.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas these folks had a rally of over 10,000 people in central DC without so much as a police barricade, without so much as, not like, there wasn't even like an emergency operations center for the possibility of this going sideways. And the thing that bothers me about it is these folks came into town armed. Like,
Yep.
let's
Yo.
be clear. Like,
And here, like, first of all, there's very high insecurity on the Capitol. But if they know of a protest, happening for Black Lives Matter, or Dreamers, all of it. They are more than prepared to take down these protesters. And what's interesting is that I didn't hear about it, but my mom was the one telling me, like, oh, the Trump people, they're gonna go on January 6th. I was like, no, Mama, you're getting confused with like Inauguration Day. Like, I literally had no idea. And the fact that, first of all, let's be clear, like, when Black and brown people are protesting, it's for freedom, it's for liberation, it's to stop murdering people in the streets, right? And they're literally storming the Capitol for what, right? And it's like, they were not just not met with brutality, they were basically welcomed. And I wanted to ask you, just kind of like, I don't know how deep we want to go into sloppy Florida politics, but just like, DeSantis used this as an opportunity to like further advance this problematic legislation around protesters being charged with, what was it, felony, or what is it? What's going on there?
Yeah, so he's been proposing now for a while this what he calls an anti-riot bill, which again is really the most suppressive, and it was really a direct reaction to Black Lives Matter. Meaning, he the most egregious part of it was that if a protest happens to move to the actual street, that a driver could mow down protesters and suffer no liability for actually potentially killing somebody with their car. Like, I want you to think about that. I want you to think about a sitting United States governor putting the citizens of his state directly in harm's way and directly in conflict with another group of people. And just marinate on that for a while, right? Like, it's mind-boggling that you would do it. Then to take a step further, he wants to do an expansion of Stand Your Ground that would basically legalize the shooting of a potential looter. Now, what do I mean? Now, when you ask what is a potential looter, that's right. I have no idea what a potential looter is.
Literally, the language is potential looter.
Yeah, I mean, just because
it's kind of like if you're anticipating a looter.
Right, because remember, Stand Your Ground,
a looter,
is basically a fear factor, right? So it's like, if I feel threatened by somebody, I can shoot them. That's what Stand Your Ground is. Now, this basically says, if you feel that this person's about to threaten property, you can shoot. So I want you to think about, if you're just going in the target, minding your business.
It's like Stand Your Ground on steroids, as if like this is just like, that's part of it. It's just like, racist policies exist and they haven't been dismantled in these racist systems. So it's like, what can we like do next to like? And I just want to take it back, and actually, like, that the first piece that DeSantis is trying to push regarding just like that came out of just the Black Lives Matter and post George Floyd protests in Florida, is, for me, like, I like to take it back to the drawing board and like back to like, how do we continue to get here, right? Because we know that this racist system has been in place. Like, we understand that's not new, but just last year, or now, I guess 2 years ago, but Dwight, the anti-Semitism bill passed in the state of Florida, right? Which dangerously, and it passed unanimously. So we're talking about our Democrat champions, the AOCs of Florida, the progressives, quote, I don't even like to use that word anymore, of Florida, not only passing this legislation, but feeling very proud about passing this legislation that dangerously equates the criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, which is targeted to specifically Black and brown activists and organizers on campus. And then, a couple years before that, 2016, we had the anti-BDS legislation, and so for me, it's like, for folks acting shocked or surprised that like now there's this piece, like, why, what do they think is going to happen when you're literally okay with criminalizing one group of activists, right? So I don't know, just that's where my mind went. Like, yeah, obviously this is terrible, obviously this is awful, but as like people on the other side of the aisle, like these legislators, like you gotta, I feel like they gotta buckle down on just like, you know, making sure this accountability process isn't just for one community over another community. And I feel like that's why we continue to lose in the state of Florida, you know, is because we keep trying to talk to this base that's never going to listen to us, right? And in the duration of that, people are still being impacted, specifically the Black and Brown communities. So I just kind of want to, am I
Yeah. No. I mean, you're making perfect sense to me. I think let's unpack anti-Semitism for a second, right? Like, a lot of people don't fully appreciate that to be anti-Semitic means that you are being discriminatory to people of a region. It's oftentimes been pigeonholed as, you know, anti-Jewish or anti-Israeli, but it's really anti-Arab, right? And so I say that to say that you're not, you know, when you don't have that same energy around the Muslim ban, when you don't have that same energy around the mistreatment of people, you know, who are having their human rights violated on a continuous basis, you know, when you didn't have that same energy when people were being unfairly targeted post 9/11, just because of their religious background, then don't come talking to me about, you know, anything else, right? Like, this notion of like, especially, and I'm just going to keep it 100. As a Black person, definitely don't come to me talking about persecution in this country, right? Like you have, you know, like you have no right, you know what I'm saying, to get up in my face and expect me to be complicit in, you know, picking favorites in this space. And, you know, and I take my tenure in the legislature as an example, right? So you got all this anti-BDS legislation, all this thing, you know, we have to protect the state of Israel, we have to protect the state of Israel. Hey, stand your ground is detrimentally impacting Black people specifically.
That's right.
The polling came out that 89% of Black people felt threatened by the presence of stand your ground. 89% of Black people.
Is that in the state of Florida? 89?
Yeah, no, 89%. 89% of people polled that were Black felt this was a threat, a direct, and, you know, directly targeting them in terms of legislation.
And to be clear, it has targeted the Black community.
Yet when you bring this up, not only was it not addressed, it was then further expanded to further impact Black people, right? So it's like this. What I hate is people who are holier than thou about wanting to protect people, and then when, you know, other things come up, they all of a sudden put their blinders on, or they become super forgetful that there are other people out here in the world that are feeling threatened. You know what I mean? Like. And then the stuff that they do is just, you know, like an example, if, you know, you're in Central Florida, a lot of people don't know about the Ocoee massacre. And so if you can imagine Black people being audacious enough to own their own homes, and then local government being like, we want that land back. And instead of saying, well, you know, here's a fair price to buy your property, what we're going to do is terrorize you and move you off that property. Deeds were burned, evidence of Black people's existence in that space, you know, going away, you know, Ocoee, Rosewood, all these different spaces. Yet the state legislature, when offering up this information, will sit there and be like, that's terrible that happened back then. And you're just like, I don't like what, like we have an 89, 90 billion dollar
Damn shame.
budget, and you're telling me you can't compensate, you know, the ancestors of people who were wrongly and viciously you know, mistreated and had their property taken away, and people were killed in the process. And it's like, so like the hypocrisy just really, like, you know, it'd be one thing if it was like balanced, but it always seems to skew towards one group that gets levels of protection, levels of consideration. You know, we want to condemn South American countries. We want to condemn, you know, Muslim countries. We want to condemn all these people, you know, through legislation, but we don't do a self-evaluation and be like, we're pretty raggedy as a state too. Like we have a,
We really are.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
we've had a problematic history of the way in which we've treated people, especially indigenous people, especially people of color, especially, you know what I mean? Like, and then, you know, but don't want to make amends for the mistakes that we've made. And that in itself is problematic, because generations will come through, you know, new legislators will come through with no kind of understanding of the longer term impact of that. You know what I mean? Like I want you to understand, like Rosewood in a nutshell from a geopolitical standpoint. It wasn't fully appreciated that that this was a thing until the 1990 census. And they took a heat map of the state and realized, why are there no black people in this weird section near Gainesville? Like, just why? Why is there just like no black people? They're just like, you know, they're here, but like not in here at all. Like not in this little space. And people were just like, well, it might have to do with this area called Rosewood. And people were just like,
what's Rosewood? All right.
Like what? Like, and I want you to understand how deep this goes. You're talking about people who own their own home, who had created an environment, were self-sufficient, had their own businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the state of Florida was complicit in completely eradicating the existence of this place through the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, so forth and so on, until some researchers from FAMU were like, oh, by the way, this happened, right? You know what I'm saying? And
but like, even when you think about the state of Florida, it's just, what is it under? What's some of the segregated schools are just like as early as how many years ago? What, like the 50 years ago that they just became desegregated? Like, it's not like Florida's still. It's not that long ago when you think about it, you know, and like meeting people
I tell folks all the time, my dad went to a segregated school. So I want you to think about that. Like, I'm only one generation removed from somebody who attended segregated school. So everyone likes to make it seem like this was so long ago. It's like, nah, man. Like, you know, we had schools that weren't desegregated till 1968, even though Brown v. Board had happened in 1954. So, you know, like, yeah, we can go on and on about the short-sightedness of the state of Florida, but I just, you know, to your point around progressives and all these other folks, you all, like, I need them to have a little bit more courage. You know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't say a little bit, a lot more courage, because it's convenient to go up to Tallahassee and cajole and high five and compromise with these folks that have basically given you their ass to kiss for a long time, right? And then fight for table scraps. But if you're not up there trying to enact some bold visionary legislation,
why are you there?
That really kind of upholds the notion of liberation of people, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, mass incarceration is an issue. Florida is the worst state per capita in terms of mass incarceration in the country. The country.
Isn't Orlando Police Department like one of the like worst police departments in the country too? And it's like and that's Orlando, this progressive city. Like, they obviously were one of the agencies that travel to Israel to get trained by the Israeli Defense Force, right? So, I mean,
Yeah, but to your point, they had a consent decree during the Obama administration because of too many occurrences of officer involved shooting. You know, so I mean, this is nothing new under the sun. I just need people to like stop acting like everything's cool. We got real problems that need to be fixed.
we have a lot of liberals in the state of Florida, and for me, it's just sometimes I feel like I don't know. We had the FDP elections yesterday, right? Do we want to talk about what your thoughts are on that?
I got
Wait, I didn't hear what you said.
I'm just rolling my eyes. I don't
Yeah.
know. That was what you heard. It was
Yeah,
it was a loud with all due respect, because I know folks who ran, I know folks who won. I like them as individuals, but there's a deeper rooted problem in the FDP that no one wants to address, right? And that is that that we're not, like the structure of the FDP does not lend itself to any sort of major reform, and thus you don't have an entity that is going to do something different. Georgia by comparison. So everyone wants to lift up Georgia. The reason Georgia can do what Georgia does is because they had to tear their Democratic Party down to the core and build it up from scratch again, right? Because Georgia, much like Florida, still had a good old boy system in place where you had a lot of white Democratic officials who were trying to run the show. And it took, dynamic black women to be like, I don't know if you know this, but your base is black people. And the fact that black people don't
women paving the way. Where the burden shouldn't even land on, right? But
right. But Congresswoman Nikema Williams was who's a chair of the Georgia Democratic Party. Doesn't get the credit she deserves for creating the space and saying that rather than fight progressive organizations like Fair Fight or New Georgia Project or Black Voters Matter, let's work in collaboration as a state party with these entities that are deliberately trying to have a conversation in communities that have been left out, right? Especially communities that have felt slighted by the Democratic Party historically. Like, you gotta, the way in which you create change is by recognizing your faults, right? First. And that's the thing that the Florida Democratic Party isn't doing. We elected new officers.
It's like this bizarre echo chamber. Like, I just feel like we got to move away from these facts, like away from these feelings. It's like facts over feelings. Like, where it's Floridians, the residents of the state of Florida, that are hurting. It's not about just like, I don't know. I just feel like the FDP is an echo chamber, even going to 2018 when Gillum's race, when we moved from the primary to the general. I'm not going to get into all that right now, but you brought up,
I saw what you did. It was a nice little segue. That was good.
You already know, all right? And
that's not your little segue. It's cool.
you brought up Georgia, right? And there's a lot of conversation about just like, for like, Democrats have no excuse at this point, right? Like, and I think another piece of it is under a Trump administration, like, he's a fascist. He's there. The white supremacy is real. It's overt. You can see it. You can feel it. Like, it's in our face. But under a Biden administration, what is scary is that the white supremacy is going to go unnoticed because it is not in our face, right? And I think when we think about these white allies, they're gonna go back to Sunday brunch, and I hope socially distanced, but like, and all of this is going to continue to fall under the radar, as it has been since inception of this country. Like, we're talking about overt versus just these policies and legislations that continue to criminalize Black and brown communities. We're talking about, even with COVID-19, right? Like, the Black community was disproportionately impacted. Disparities are enhanced, but this wasn't something new within the Black community. It was just amplified under this global pandemic. Black women continue to not be taken seriously in the medical care offices. They continue to die disproportionately when it comes to just pregnancies. So this isn't something new. So when we think about the racism that exists outside of a fascist administration, it's kind of like, oh, well, here's this cleaner, dirty shirt, you know, and it's exhausting. So under this Biden administration, for me, you know, as a Palestinian, as a Muslim woman, I'm not excited. What I saw in Georgia was beautiful, just like because of the grassroots organizers on the ground. But I do have to talk about just like Warnock and how, you know, he seemed like this radical pastor that was for the people, and just like to, you know, I watched his video because like, I'm just about like his, and it, you know, it didn't obviously. I feel like maybe in his heart he's still for the Palestinian people. I can't speak on his behalf, but just to like throw the Palestinian community behind, and for me, it's like a place like Georgia. Like, would you have lost if you stuck? Like, I feel like you could have still won on this ground of inconsistency. Like, there's a large Muslim community in Georgia, Arab Palestinian population. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, at this point, like, Democrats have no excuse to not be bold, because right now we have obviously the squad, AOC, Rashida, Ilhan, but now we have Jamal Bowman. We have Cori Bush. I mean, Cori Bush is just like, she's already popping off, right? Like, she's ready to unseat, and that's what we need. So like, that's what I'm excited for. But I'm also, there's this fear like that it's just gonna get worse under an administration where it's not so in people's faces.
No, I mean that's always been the case, right? Where, you know, racism, you know, xenophobia, etc., you know, gets kind of swept under the rug during certain administrations, and then you go ahead and give those administrations passes for doing it. And you know, I'll just be frank, from a failure to address systemic racist policies, right? Like, we know what Clinton did under, you know, with the 94 crime bill. We know, you know, what happened there. But the idea that, you know, someone who is a civil rights attorney and a legal scholar, you know, who happens to be president by the name Barack Obama, a failure to address that, knowing that exists during your administration, is problematic, right? And it has nothing to do with like, well, I don't want to take, you know, bold steps because I'm the first Black. No, it's like, right is right, wrong is wrong, right? You have a situation in which you've had an explosion of mass incarceration that has detrimentally impacted, you know, one group over another. You bring in the first Black attorney general, two of them, the first two Black attorney general, and then don't do anything substantive. Like, you know, I appreciate the release and the expungement of folks for drug policies and things of that nature, but like, you could have done so much more, right? And so now the question becomes, your wingman is now president, and is he going to do something bold and innovative? He's, you know, his running mate is somebody who has her own track record as a prosecutor, but at the same time, once he has at least talked about the notion of reform, and now you have control of both chambers. So what does that look like? You know what I mean? I don't think, and to your point, I don't think anyone's going to fight you if you were to put something in place that was like a repeal and replace of 94 crime. Like no one's, going to say that reduction of mass incarceration is a bad idea, considering we're the most carceral country in the world. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like when Russia and China are doing better than you at something that is problematic, you should rush to try to change that dynamic. So to the issue around the Palestinian people, there's
well, I
another one,
also
right?
want to
Like,
say about like Warnock was also like he wasn't for defund the police from the jump, or did that change?
right.
Or he was just never for defunding the police. Like,
Well, that's the thing. Everyone tries to nuance and pivot center. It's what I hate about politics by and large is all your consultants will sit around and tell you, well, you can't take this position because it's not polling well, or you can't take this position because it's hard to explain. But defund the police is not, in my opinion, is not controversial.
it's not.
It's just not. It's not when you look at what defund by definition means, right? Like everyone automatically says, and this is what always kills me is like when I'm having this conversation with Black people, and they're like, we can't get rid of the police department. It's like, wait. Defund and abolish or eradicate are two totally different things. Now, don't get it twisted. I would love to envision a world in which we don't have to, rely on, a militarized force to help keep us under control. Like I dream of a day and place where we can practice self-governance, where we don't rely on it, right? But and just for those who've never picked up a history book, the idea of a police force is only about 150 years old, meaning that we did not have large-scale police forces in this country.
And also understanding like the intention of its commission and why it was commissioned.
Yes. Yeah, so like it's happened in the past. We can do it again, but when we talk about defund the police, yet we see what's happening to education funds. We see what's happening to healthcare funds. We see what's happening to environmental protection funds. That is, I don't know if people know, that's defunding. When the government moves resources from those programs into another thing, that's what defunding looks like. So what I want to clarify for those who don't know, right, is that even in the midst of financial crisis, there's never been a cutting of law enforcement funds at the state level, city level, whatever. It's always net positive for police in these cities. Like you go through your budgets historically. I encourage people, because it's all public record, look at the budget for your city over the last 10 years. And the reason I say last 10 years is because we had an economic crisis 10 years ago. And what you will not see at any point was a reduction of law enforcement dollars. You will see You'll see a reduction in transportation. You'll see a reduction in healthcare. You'll see a reduction in a bunch of things, but you will not see City of Orlando, City of Kissimmee, City of Miami. You will not see a reduction in law enforcement at any point in time, even when we needed money.
That's right. I can talk to you all day. It looks like we have Instagram is gonna cut us off in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to give you your flowers, at all the work you do in the state of Florida and beyond, and you've been doing it for a minute. I would love if you can close out, considering last year, this year has already been rough, right? But what do you do to take care of yourself, Dwight? And I hope you're doing that. And some words of encouragement, maybe folks might resonate with. Just what do you do to keep going in this work? What is it that continues to fuel you?
Well, I'm gonna share with you something I learned back in college. Learned of the concept back in college, but didn't fully appreciate it till I became an adult. And There's a book called African World Revolution by Dr. John Henrik Clarke. And Dr. Clarke talks about the essential selfishness of survival. And the best example I can give, the best analogy I can give is that if you were stuck on an island with, a group of people, and you are the best fisherman or fisherwoman on the island, meaning that only you are successful at bringing in the sustenance that these people need to survive. If you do not get the proportion that you need in order to stay strong, everyone else will perish, right? And so people have to remember that you have to be deliberate about some version of self-care. You have to be deliberate about, making sure your mental health is good. You have to make sure that your family structure is intact. Otherwise, you're no good to greater humanity, right? And so that's what I would encourage people to do is like, it sounds, people are like selfishness. Like sometimes you got to do it, right? You have to take a step back, right? Because the fight's always going to be there. Like oppression has been around for a while and it's not going to end tomorrow, right? So if you decide to go get your nails done tomorrow, I promise you there'll still be oppression to fight the day after. Right?
Yo, I haven't gotten my nails done since the pandemic, so don't remind me. But no everything everything you've said is beautiful, and I just want to say as a friend, I'm forever grateful to have you in my life, and like you've always been a sounding board for me and so many other people. And yeah, sometimes it feels unsafe to stop or rest. So I appreciate the affirmation. And any last thoughts before we go?
We're going to be celebrating MLK's birthday on this week. With that, there's always a notion of doing a day of service in response to that around that holiday. So if there's something out there, if there's a food distribution, you being able to lend your helping hand to another human being, take advantage of it this upcoming week.
Beautiful. All righty. Thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate you.
Yes,
I'll talk to you
Have a
later.
good one.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye.